Well, that's our correspondent, Yogita Lamai, there in Kabul. And we will stay in the city because I'm joined by someone who is a lecturer at the American University of Afghanistan, which is based in Kabul. I'm joined by Abdullah Bahir. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us at such a, well, I was going to say at such a very difficult and uncertain time. I mean, of course, viewers in this country are interested in your experience, what day-to-day life is now like for you and your friends and colleagues.
Thank you for having me, Jane. It's interesting because when I was contacted by your team for the interview, I was already sitting with a few friends and we were trying to make a plan with regards to what ought to responsible citizens be doing in this time. The IDP camps are overflowing. And there doesn't seem to be a plan as to how to manage them. There is not only a military strategy missing, there is also an emergency strategy not in place. Everyone is flocking towards Kabul, whereas Afghanistan is divided into almost 9 zones or 4 zones if you look at it militarily. Why isn't the government setting IDP camps for these people there? We heard the first vice president talk about the humanitarian crisis that might unfold and ask the international community to help out, but they can only help out once you have a plan on the ground, and it seems to be missing. So some people are thinking about that. Other people are thinking about how to get out of here. When the initial Taliban push for Mazar-e-Sharif started, within the same day, we had 21 flights booked out of Mazar-e-Sharif. That means the elite, those who can afford it, are trying to find their way out. And it's just going to bleed Afghanistan dry of its brains, of any future that the country might have. But people don't have any other option. The people do not have a leadership to stand by. They don't have a charismatic figure that is leading this fight with any hope. We just have squabbling politicians at a time where it is a national urgency to take a stance.
Have you thought about getting out?
Well, I don't want to make big claims that I cannot stand by in the future, but I personally do not want to leave. I think even if they reach Kabul, there will be a need for voices like mine. And no matter how much they lack the tolerance to hear opposing voices, but I've lived too far for too long from my country to desert it now. So hopefully I'll be here and I'll try to do as much as I can without picking up arms. That I think fighting is the easier way out. And there's much more that one can do, including educating the youth of this country at such a time when they look up to people like me and they ask me for perspective, something that I can try to provide and speak some sense to them. So hopefully I'll be around to do that.
I mean, you speak about that very movingly, but are you scared? Are you, your friends, your colleagues scared?
I mean, we are desensitized to a great extent because when you've grown up with these stories and these realities, sometimes I think your assessment of realities is skewed. So I might be partially delusional in my hope for the future. And obviously there is hope. You do look over your shoulder from time to time. I have my father scream at me every morning through WhatsApp calls, telling me to stop giving interviews and stop being so in the open, in the public space, because it's a clear threat. They've been targeted assassinations. They take out dissident voices. But I think that there is a moral responsibility here as well, and there's a limited bandwidth available in which either impartial people like me can present an honest picture, or they can be partial people trying to sell their agendas. So we have to push them out of that space.
Is there any prospect that the Afghan military could win through against the Taliban? Is there any chance of that?
I teach conflict resolution, so a lot of what we do with regards to conflict resolution and conflict transformation, to the 2 courses that I teach, we discuss long-term institutionalism, and we talk about how it's important that state building happen in case you're trying to fight an insurgency in the long run. The problem is the Afghan government failed to govern properly, to manage this war properly for 20 years. And it appears like it's far too late now. They kept telling us that their military strategy was to tactically retreat from districts and garrison into the cities and protect them. Then we see 9 cities falling within a week. So it's just very hopeless looking at all of that. But what can happen is if the international community, the United Nations has a lot of bureaucracy, so for it to pass any sanctions would take too much time. But what the United States can do is it can revoke its peace deal with the Taliban. There's nothing left in it. They have not satisfied those conditions, including allegiances with other militant groups, including the way they've conducted this war and a few other conditions that aren't there anymore. Once they revoke those, they can create certain levels of pressure on the Taliban and their sponsor states. Travel bans can follow. So once that happens, there can be some breathing space for the Afghan government. But at the end of the day, the onus lies on them unless they can figure out a strategy, a viable one, and create enough political capital internally to work towards it. It seems like a very hopeless fight. So that's what we're banking on. We're hoping that the international community can buy us some vital time, and then a miracle can push the political elite here or the leadership to act like leaders instead of just prolonging it until the final push for the capital happens.
Do you feel let down by those, by the West, by the Western countries who have withdrawn their troops?
Look, I'm an Orientalist. I personally do not think that the Afghan people needed the West. We could have solved our problems ourselves, and the foreign troops had to leave at some point or the other. Is just extremely problematic the way that they did it, and the sense of elusiveness or aloofness towards the responsibility they had towards us. I mean, Biden can stand up and say we didn't go there to nation build, despite the 100 contrary statements that individuals representing the US had said then that opposed such a statement. But even if it was just about fighting Al-Qaeda, they did not defeat Al-Qaeda. If it was about assassinating bin Laden, then it was our people that laid down their lives in realizing that goal to begin with. So I guess if nothing else, they owed us more responsible withdrawal. They turned off their lights in Bagram Air Base and ran. That created this sense of impending victory for the Taliban. So all the momentum that they're enjoying is or has been gifted to them by the United States. And I don't think the Afghan people deserved it. And now the international community owes it to the Afghan people. Before we have another Rwanda, another Yugoslavia, another Yemen on our hands, the international community has to prevent the catastrophe from taking place. They have to slow down the Taliban. That could even include closing down the Doha office, because negotiations aren't working. You cannot preach negotiations when both parties, specifically the Taliban, are not negotiating in good faith. They haven't done so for the past few months. They have been aiming for the total victory outcome. And that means that you are just turning a blind eye to all their atrocities in the hopes that one day they will sit down and negotiate. If you are going to sit and negotiate with an insurgent group when they have the upper hand, it's not a negotiation, it is a surrender. And the international community should not expect Afghanistan or the common Afghan people to surrender to the Taliban, because it will haunt them this time, not in 15 years, this time not in 20 years, but this time it will be much sooner. I guess the lesson learned from Al-Qaeda's existence in Afghanistan or their creation here should have taught the West a lesson, and a security vacuum here will haunt them.
We must leave our conversation there. Very, very grateful for your time. Thank you so much, and we send you all our best, of course. Thank you so much. That's Ubaydullah Bahir, thank you, who is a lecturer in transitional justice at the American University of Afghanistan, speaking there from Kabul. And we will talk much more about the situation in Afghanistan in the next hour in particular, and I'll be talking to Médecins Sans Frontières, among others, about the humanitarian situation in the country at the moment as well. So that is still to come.